Let's give you the short version of why this time is different. The trigger in 2009 was around banking gone bad. The remedy then was stimulus. Governments opened the tap on big government spending projects. This time, nobody's talking stimulus. State coffers are empty, and it's public, not private debt, that's pushing economies to the brink and citizens out into the streets. With Germany acting as paymaster in this crisis, partner nations are now pleading for a break, asking Berlin to go beyond austerity, austerity, and more austerity. So how do you avoid the equivalent of Japan's lost decade of stagnant growth in Europe? How do you spur that growth on in a continent without cash? To make aging Europe more competitive, should we be braced for instance, a radical review of ingrained work habits, otherwise put, a loosening of labor law? Today in the France 24 debate, Europe's austerity angst. And with us from Strasbourg, Pino Arlacchi, member of the European Parliament from Italy's centrist Democratic Party. Thank you for being with us. I know you can only be with us for part one because you've got a voter roll call coming up. Thank you for being with us. Also with us, Raphaël Nadzinski of the Force Ouvrière Trade Union Confederation. Olivier Lecomte, who teaches finance at prestigious graduate school, l'École Centrale.
Good evening. And
Christian Stoffes, who chairs the Franco-German Council of Economic Analysis. Thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate, which you can always follow on Facebook or weigh in on the conversation, if you will, and on Twitter, where you can find us at François F24. Yesterday at this same time, we evoked the new Italian premier's warning to the German chancellor, Mario Monti, asking Angela Merkel to ease up a notch on austerity. He repeated this message in a front-page interview with the Financial Times Tuesday, where he points to reforms already decided by his new government. And he says, if this strong movement towards discipline and stability is not recognized as taking place, and a certain approach to financial aspects does not gradually evolve, there will be a powerful backlash in the countries which are being submitted to a huge effort of discipline. That's the message sent by Mario Monti. I want to begin with you, Pino Arlacchi. It's the second time that he's gone public with this in the last couple of days. I guess that message isn't getting across.
Yes, Mr. Monti is absolutely right. What we need now is a quick growth, a program of spending, a program that does exactly the opposite of what most European governments actually are doing in this moment. Monti is right because Italy did already a major effort in austerity, in cutting expenses, in cutting the budget and so on. What we need now is growth, and to do that, the Italian government, but also the rest of Europe, needs to change completely its direction.
How do you change it? Let's go straight into it here. What do you do? What is the way to change direction, if you will?
Program for expenditures in infrastructures. We should stop to be obsessed by inflation. We should, for once, try to follow what the United States are trying to do since a couple of years. I'm not a particular admirer of the USA, but I have to say the way they reacted to the financial crisis in 2008 and the way they are still reacting to the prolongation of the crisis is showing a direction that Europe should follow. Instead, we are doing the opposite. We are just continuing with these suicidal measures that means depriving countries that are in difficulty of the very means to overcome the situation. We are killing Greece.
But Christian Stoffes, the Germans, when you tell them stop obsessing with inflation, they're not going in for that. Is there a sign, though, that the Merkel government is perhaps moving on this issue?
But it's not so much the issue of inflation. The issue is public debt. We are now reaching a situation where public debt is around 100% of GNP. So these are levels of really big crisis. These are levels you meet during war periods. After World War II, World War I, we had a situation like that. And 100%, it's enormous. This is the issue. This is not the issue of inflation, of course. But quite clearly, Germany is under siege. Germany is circled.
And they're feeling that pressure. Pino Arlacchi, they're mentioning, why can't there be, he's alluding to the United States, where there's been what they call, it's a bit complicated, quantitative easing, where they've spent money they've injected cash into the economy. Are we getting close to the period where the European Central Bank will be allowed to do that?
No, that's a good point, because really we don't know exactly what to do. The economics don't give a real answer what to do. Basically, you can compare two situations, two strategies, one in the United States under Obama and one in Europe under the leadership of Germany. So there are very contrasted policy mix. But can you really argue that the US are doing better? US are also at 100% of GNP of public debt, which is enormous. They have a 10% unemployment rate. They have low growth. So the situation is not clearly in favor of US. So it's a matter of debate. So Germany has a point. Germany has a point.
Well, it looks like the US are improving. The situation tends to improve in terms of growth and in terms of employment. But at the same time, I think we had this huge debt problem which hadn't been addressed for 30 years, at least for deficits. And so clearly we needed to do something. So I wouldn't say that we could just continue to ignore the debt question so far. But now we also need growth, because clearly it's not the only the level of debt which is problematic. It's also the level of debt related to growth. We could have, I don't know, 40% of GDP, a debt of 40% of GDP, but if we don't grow or if we have a recession, that still would be too much. Do you understand? It's very easy to understand. So it's really a question of finding the proper balance between taking steps in order to reduce expense, public spending, because clearly it's been growing for years and years, especially here in France. So we know that we really have a problem of public services productivity and efficiency. So that's something which need to be addressed.
Looking at productivity, I just want to get back to one thing that Christian Stoffes mentioned, the Germans feeling encircled. They're not the only ones. We can give you one example from just overnight, 2 homemade bombs going off outside a tax office in Naples, the latest in a series of such attacks. Let me ask you, Pino Arlacchi, how much wiggle room have you got these days when you're an Italian politician on all this?
But the situation today improved very much. Italy is much more respected and credible in all its program of economic recovery.
But with its own electorate.
Excuse me?
But with its own voters, with its own electorate.
With its own electorate, who? Us? You
yes,
mean,
the Italian electorate. How do they feel about it all?
They are showing a remarkable degree of support and solidarity for all measures that the new government is taking to go up, overcome the situation. Few episodes of irresponsibility, of violence, doesn't really account. The majority of Italians overwhelmingly support the current government effort. But most people want also to see the other side of the coin. We reached already the limit. Beyond that, there is a deep recession, a deep social discontent, and no possibility to have the resources to grow and to balance the budget. To balance the budget, you need resources. You cannot balance a budget just making cuts. To need the resources, you need to have an economy that develop, to increase taxation base. On taxation base, we are also doing a remarkable effort in fighting tax evasion, which is a hidden resource that we have to now capitalize. We have now to oblige a lot of Italians who don't pay taxes to start to do it. And the Monti government is already successful on it, because the sheer expectation that there will be a severe punishment for people with evaded taxation is increasing the volume of state revenues.
Do you think that all of this could be wiped out? I know that there are a lot of treasury bonds that are maturing just this month in Italy. If there isn't some kind of debt restructuring, those efforts that you've just been talking about, will they be wiped out?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe so. We, on the issue of debt, we have these huge problems of the rating agencies who are playing a very dangerous and I suspect also dirty game against Europe and against Italy. We have now really to face this issue and escape the damage that these rating agencies are doing to all of us.
Christian Stoffes, is it the fault of the rating agencies?
Mostly.
If the thermometer rises, it's because the temperature rises. So rating agencies are no more than journalists, like us. They make judgments. It's their own responsibility. But the problem is the situation. Again, we are not really sure of what to do, because I don't believe personally in the effect of public expenditure on growth. It's not proved. The situation to which we refer, Keynesian situation, the Great Depression, was different. It was a question of excess savings, which had to be spent by public expenditure. This is not the situation today. It's a common belief. The Germans do not believe in that. They do not believe in that. They do not believe in that. So it's a matter of discussion. So let's not take it for granted. There is a debate. It's true that it's very difficult to reduce budget deficit and to have growth simultaneously. It's difficult, but really we don't know what to do. We might have a crisis in the near future. When you say that Italy has solved its problems, now it's time for reflation. The proof is not made. Monti has decided courageous measures. We don't know exactly the result. The Greeks have sworn in the past 2 years that they were doing something. Nothing happened. The situation of Greece is still worse than it was. So it did not work. So really we have to wait for the results.
Raphael Nijinsky, do you agree you're not going to be able to spend your way out of this one?
I mean, first thing, what I want to say, I mean, when you talk about, I mean, everybody agrees that one has to reduce public deficit, but there are obviously two ways. Either you reduce public spendings or you increase incomes, state incomes. I think that in terms of reducing public spendings, one is getting to the bones. And I think now one has to consider, I mean, to a certain extent, to increase the state incomes. And I think in saying that, I mean, one has to look at the causes and the reality of the deficit. The deficit has not increased because public spendings have increased. It has mainly increased because state incomes have reduced. The number of taxes have reduced. Yes, they have. And there are figures on that. There have been transfers, not only reduction in taxes, but also transfers from, for instance, states saying, oh, well, I'm going to pay social contribution instead of companies. I'm going to transfer certain companies to local authorities, but I'm going to support them in a way or another. So I think there is a way of talking, there is a need to talk about raising the incomes. And of course, yes, you mentioned earlier on that there is no problem of private debt. Yes, there is, because if people have debt, of course, that has also a negative impact on the state incomes. There's one thing I want to say, just one figure. I mean, one problem we have now is that interest rates are higher than growth. And if we are in such situation, then that means that there is still a danger of recession, and that you need to encourage activity and consumptions. And there, I think, is a question, or what sort of policy, industrial policy. When we talk about, we'll talk later on maybe about Germany, but when we talk about Germany, it's not only a question of comparing labor costs, it's also a question of what are investment policy, what are industrial policies, how are companies behaving, are they exporting or not. So the number of points that one can imagine and the number of things that you can encourage. It's not just injecting money as a whole, but it's a question how you inject and in what you inject that money.
Olivier Lecomte, again, this crisis has been going on since 2009, 2008, excuse me.
Yeah.
This rethink of public policy, of how you spend your money, has it just not happened up till now, or has it?
No, I think it has happened. At least you cannot say that the government income has been reduced. It's about the same level in France for the last years. It's even gone upward recently, and of course it has.
If you take
it has reached all-time high. In fact, in last year, but I think the Germans were right insofar as now the question of public deficits and debt is clearly on the table, and steps have been taken everywhere in Europe, and especially here in France. Whereas 1 year ago, you could still hear people, politicians in France, saying, well, debt is not a problem. 1 year ago, and even 6 months ago, if you read the Socialist Party program published in June 2011, they said that they could spend a lot of money. So I think so far the Germans were right to say, okay, we've got to take very strong steps in order to at least to reduce deficits and to keep debt at a certain level. Now I think they should accept that once we have done that, once we have given clear signals that we intend to do that, we also need to have growth. So now we clearly shouldn't go too far in reducing spending and raising taxes. I agree. But I think so there was a first step. Now we need to discuss a second step together in Europe, because it's also clear that we need collaboration, we need cooperation in order to
together
have things.
in Europe. But before we go to the break, Pino Arlacchi, I know you have to go soon. Just if things don't work out, if it all comes to a head, do you see there being two different Europe zones, two different Eurozones in the future, a Northern Europe and a Southern Europe that break apart?
No, I don't believe so. If we will have a differentiation, probably it could go the other way around, because Northern European economies are much more mature. They reached already many limits to grow. Probably we can have the opposite. And anyway, would be not good for the European Union. We created a huge system. We created the biggest economy in the world. And to distinguish too much between different parts of the system would be bad and would the beginning of a disaster. And we, unfortunately, what is occurring is that we are starting to do it with Greece. I was saying that some measures are killing Greece because demands on Greece went beyond any reasonable standard.
Beyond any reasonable standard, we're gonna have to leave it there.
Any reasonable, because they
I know that you have to go to a vote. So I want to thank you for being with us, gentlemen. Stay with us. In part 2, we'll talk about solving all these problems in the context of a presidential election campaign in this country. Stay with us.